You know, the American people, for too long, have been an irresponsible, free people. And even generation to generation, as they've become less free, they don't recognize it. They have lost the ability of critical thought. In order to regain critical thought, all you have to do is read your Constitution and then look at the laws that govern you, especially from the federal perspective. It's unconscionable to allow your freedoms to be taken away decade after decade after decade, year after year. And I'm very proud of this, by the way. My nation, the Lakota, were the first nation to militarily defeat the United States of America on the field of battle. And that resulted in the 1868 Sioux Treaty. Be that as it may, what has happened after they economically forced us into these prisoner of war camps by destroying our food supply and our right of passage in our own land, they confined us to these, and then they began practicing and perfecting their colonial tactics. What has happened is now America, because of the irresponsibility of your forebears and the irresponsibility of yourselves, you are now on one huge Indian reservation. All policies were bred and born and birthed on an Indian reservation, and then exported to the world, and now comes back on the backs of the American people. You have a near-perfect document. In the words of Benjamin Franklin in 1744, to a collection of colonists discussing freedom, he said to them, and I quote, "If a nation to the north can form a near-perfect union that has endured for centuries, why cannot we form a more perfect union?" Unquote. So they're talking about the Iroquois Confederacy, and that's where the Constitution comes from. Because in 1988, on the eve of the 200-year anniversary of the Constitution, it was a unanimous thank you by the Congress of the United States. They sent in writing to the Six Nations Iroquois Confederacy, thanking them for their input into the Constitution and the formation of the United States of America. So you see, the Constitution is Indian law, and that's why I love it.
That's a short excerpt from Welcome to the Reservation with Russell Means. Last year, some of my crew traveled to the Lakota Nation to talk to the iconic actor and political activist, human rights activist. And I think it's one of the best overall works out there, really showing you what Russell Means stands for, not what the controlled corporate media and others say. And I'm proud of the work that we did with that and the great job that Russell did. Of course, he really doesn't need much of an introduction. The LA Times has described him as the most famous American Indian since Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse. He, of course, led the 71-day armed takeover of the sacred grounds of Wounded Knee, while the FBI and others poured in tens of thousands of rounds of ammo at them. He also joined the longest walk in '78 to protest the new tide of anti-Indian legislation, including the forced sterilization of Indian women. George Herbert Walker Bush headed all that up and then went to China to carry out the operation there. He also, of course, has been in dozens and dozens of famous movies and is an iconic individual. And he's helped lead the movement for the Lakota Nation to declare independence, and that's had a lot of success. And he has, the doctors told him, he was basically a goner. He's defeated cancer. Just amazing. So there's so much to talk about with Russell. Right as we got him on here during the break, I said, what do you want to talk about? The cancer, the NDAA police state, the new wars, all the things that are going on. And he said, well, I want to get into the upcoming economic collapse. And that's certainly happening right now. So we'll get into that first with Russell Means joining us from his home. Russell, great to have you on with us.
Thank you. Great to be with you again.
So much has happened, but you predicted many years ago this economic implosion. It's here. You got criticized for not worshiping Obama. Now it's been proven that he's owned by the same people as Bush and others. You're being vindicated yet again, Russell.
Well, it wasn't hard at all. It's pretty easy to figure out which way the America is going. It's it's called a country founded on deceit will die by deceit. And with all the broken treaties, which is a violation of the Constitution, and then the ongoing violations of the Constitution against the American people, starting in the 1870s, even before that, in the 1840s, when they created the corporation, and then on to 1913 to the New Deal. On and on and on. As we go through American history, we see how they continue to put the handcuffs on American people. And now it's complete. We're a police state, no doubt about it. And the American people haven't risen up yet. I don't understand it, and I condemn it. But, occupying a public park is not a meaningful strategy to get something done. It's with the impending economic collapse, because based on the greed of the 1%, the Wall Streeters, in collusion with the government and corporate America, this year alone, now since Obama took over, we've had about a 23% inflation rate over the 3 years. Well, in the coming year, it's going to jump to 30% for this year, 30 added percent. The reasons why is because the United States of America has lost the ability of having the U.S. dollar be the international money utilized in all transactions on the international level of goods and services. Because of that, the Fed cannot continue printing money. They could only print money while everyone was exchanging their monies for U.S. dollars. So they could buy oil, they could buy raw materials, they could lend, lease, et cetera, et cetera. Well, what we have now with the Fed printing funny money that has no backing, and at the same time, it's a vicious little cycle up there in Wall Street. The Fed is buying T-bills, which are worthless, and then issuing money. So the trillion-dollar debt that everyone's talking about, yes, that hurts. It has to be dealt with immediately, but it's too late. It's too late. The coming 30% inflation rate is what's going to happen in America? You're going to see trucks hijacked on the highway, food trucks. You're going to see chaos in the South, in the Northwest, all over America. No longer will immigration be an issue. No longer will anything else be an issue except the worst of times, the worst of American times. And now you can't criticize the federal government without disappearing, going to Guantanamo or some like prison. And speaking of Guantanamo, that policy was derived strictly from American Indian policy. It started in the Seminole Wars, and it was continued with the Apache Wars and the wars with my people. We won. And of course, the deceit set in. All I'm saying right now is we know the history We know the contemporary times, and yet, because of the impending collapse, with the cycle of money, of the Fed issuing money, that is why it's called funny money. It's called funny money because the dollar is no longer the international currency. Therefore, because of all other currencies being changed to dollars so they can buy goods and services throughout the international community, what we have now is people are creating alliances to buy with their own monies or with gold, or they're creating money like the Arab Emirates and the Middle East. The Arabs are starting to create their own currency.
India just announced they're going to stop using the dollar. That's a big deal.
Yes, they're buying their oil from Iran, and it's done with gold. Now, what's going to happen in America, because of this funny money, and it's a vicious cycle there inside Wall Street, where the Fed is buying up worthless T-bills and then issuing money because they bought up all these savings and and then they're funding the banks with more money. It's just a vicious cycle that's suicidal. And that's why inflation's going to raise 30% this year alone versus the 24% under Obama in 3 years. So you see, the country's going to become a calamity of chaos. You're going to have trucks hijacked on the highway, food trucks hijacked on the highways. It's going to be a dangerous time in America, and it's going to begin at the end of this year.
Well, as you know, in Argentina 10 years ago or 11 years ago, the same thing happened. They were very wealthy, but they had the same inflation happen. And you're always extremely well read. You're always up to the minute. The Davos meeting, as you know, the big global banksters are meeting in Europe, and they're actually saying, George Soros and others, that total collapse, worst time in history, worse than when George Soros was even involved as a trader in World War II. He's actually saying that. All these other big bankers are saying that, and they've covered up the inflation so far, but you're right, it's now accelerating, and their answer is Homeland Security drills. Practicing to lock up the general public, practicing, they're in the news again saying arrest people that criticize the government. They were detaining Rand Paul and groping Ron Paul at the airport, and Rush Limbaugh said, well, they don't want war, so they're terrorists. I mean, he actually said this. So they're sending up trial balloons now to actually use the National Defense Authorization Act on the American people. And as you said, for decades, and I've studied the history, it's true what you're saying, Hitler, the British, all of it, used their concentration camp models and their city lockdown models that they've used in Fallujah and Iraq and other areas, was all beta tested here. And now, isn't it fitting in a sick way that everything that was pioneered here in the United States is now going to come back on everybody?
On everybody. And that's why I mentioned that famous saying about deceit. A country founded on deceit will die by deceit. And this country, you know, it's a very disparate country. You have the South, you have New England, you have the Mid-Atlantic states, you have the Great Lakes, you have Texas, you have the Southwest, the West Coast, the Northern Plains, the Southern Plains, et cetera, et cetera. We have a very disparate country that's far from really being unified as a nation state because of our lack of culture. Now, when we have a lack of culture, there goes the value system. And the value system in America is one of convenience. Everyone in America will do anything for convenience. Like your Apples, you know, you own about 5 different kinds of computers that you can carry around on your person. That's ridiculous. I've seen them in the airplanes, you know, they have an iPhone, they have a book, they have a Kindle book. It's and then their computer. It's crazy.